Welcome to Behind the Curtain, where we discuss everything from aliens and conspiracies to ancient civilizations and religions, all from a biblical perspective. Good afternoon, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
You went to the doctor. Everything's fine. Everything's benign.
Oh,
You're
man.
okay.
Dude. Yeah.
I don't go to the doctor because they find things wrong with you.
Yeah, just so
So
everyone's
just
clear,
don't go.
Josh is joking. There's nothing wrong with me.
You get a bunch of phone calls. What's wrong?
You're going to start a
What
bunch
happened?
of rumors. Yeah, so,
No, it's because you had the little thing on your leg, so that's what I was wondering.
yeah, I'm wearing a knee brace today.
He's bracing himself for this episode.
That's right. I'm going to knee it. I've been kneeing biblical
We're gonna knee this episode right in the
traditions.
face.
And so, bracing. Okay, so last week we attempted to discuss Genesis 3, and we got 3 words deep.
We did, yeah, we did.
Now the serpent. Oh,
Genesis
you know,
3.
so here's what I was thinking to start this episode. We should
Ask for money.
if you'd like to support.
I just want listeners. That's all I want. I don't
Yeah.
care about money. Just
Well-
listen to the podcast and share it.
We're doing pretty good.
It's not bad. Not
I'll
bad.
say this for a hobby.
Yeah, for a
doing very
hobbyist,
good.
yeah, we're impacting lives. You never know.
Yeah. So we say a lot of things just in conversation.
Yeah, we do.
On this podcast.
And I'll just point out that you're wearing a Bigfoot shirt today.
And you're wearing a Stranger
And I'm
Things
wearing a
shirt.
Stranger Things shirt today. That's perfect.
Yeah, man.
Perfect. Of where we need to go with our content.
It's where we're getting.
We're getting there. We're getting there
Getting.
slowly. We're going up the mountain.
Yeah, dude.
But yeah, we do say a lot of things.
Oh yeah. So what I was
that-
going to say was we have a time limit every time we record. And so there's a lot of things that we say in conversation and we don't have time to explain.
Right.
And so I was thinking, like, off the top of your head, are there any things you want to review just within the first 10 minutes of this podcast? So, like, I'll give you a for instance.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the other day, re-listening to our old episodes, that, like, I mentioned Richard Rohr and pantheism and stuff. And I would love, this is the thing, too. These are all topics we can do full episodes on later.
True, yeah.
And so, like, we need to do an episode about progressive Christianity and, like, how they twist and misinterpret the Bible and
yeah.
stuff. But, like, I didn't really explicitly say it on that episode that, like, Richard Rohr, I do not think he's a Christian.
Right,
And
okay.
I think he's deceiving a lot of people.
Yeah.
But he's
I don't know much about him, but from what you've told me, it doesn't sound good.
No. I referenced him. We were discussing that the Word of God is not a created being. And
Right.
I don't know if he would say that he was created or not, but he believes that Christ was in, like, literally physically in creation, right?
Yeah.
And so
He's like,
we can all be gods because
the Christ
we all have God
consciousness
in us.
is in all things.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
thinks that Christ consciousness, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
People think that Jesus was not the way we interpret the anointed one, the Christ, the Messiah, right? Jesus was not God that became a man, and that Jesus was not appointed by God to be king and priest. They believe that he was just a man, and he was the first man to achieve
Godhood.
Christ consciousness.
I think that goes along with, like, is it Jehovah's Witness that think he was just a dude and, like, kind of became
like
a
ascended.
god?
Yeah.
I'm not sure on that, but
It's either, well, I think I always get Jehovah's Witness and
it's one of
Mormons
those
confused.
crazy guys. Yeah.
So we
one
need
of
to do an
those-
episode about them too, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Dude, we should
Mormons,
get a
I think,
Mormon on the show.
yeah. Well, we'd have to get 2 of them.
True. Yeah. We'll just wait till they come to our door and be like, "Hey, you're going to be on our podcast. Come on
Step
in.
into my office.
Come on in." Yeah. They'd be like, "Oh, we're coming in."
Well, I think Mormons are the ones that believe that, like, everybody can become God of their own.
Of their own planet.
Yes,
Yeah.
so-
Their own kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
There's some weird beliefs out there, man. And it's weird how they all take the same Bible we're reading and they go, "Oh, so this clearly means this." And it's like, no, are you crazy?
So I don't endorse South Park, but I will say there's an episode of South Park that all they do is tell the story of Mormonism.
Okay.
And it is the funniest thing you'll ever see in your life.
Wow. They
just stick to the script of how Joseph Smith got the tablets from the angel, and
it's bizarre.
gosh, it is hilarious.
Like I don't know. I've talked to a few Mormons before, and it's just interesting how a lot of religions are like this, but you have to protect, you have to live in a bubble to take your own religion seriously.
Yeah.
And
it's like a lot of Christians.
Yeah. Well, there definitely are some groups in Christianity.
Well, they memorize a script. They're given a script, basically, and they have to memorize that script. And if you deviate off of that script, then they're like, oh, malfunction.
Yes. And you're not allowed to look up outside resources and hear what other people say about your religion.
Right.
You're told what to believe. And
yeah. I will say, though, Mormonism, and it's kind of like me. I get the two mixed up, Jehovah's Witness. I want to say Mormonism does teach a divine council. They do teach a plurality of gods in the heavens, and
well, I guess they have to.
That's where a lot of Mormons have found Dr. Heiser's work and have talked to him about it. And
oh yeah,
Heiser even talked about this one guy that was a professor at BYU, so it's Brigham Young. It's one the biggest Mormon university. A professor found his work and followed him around and went to his lectures and was I'm so surprised that an evangelical Christian is teaching this kind of stuff. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But if you want to see something fun, go on YouTube and look up Mormonism cartoons. And it's basically the cartoons, these from the 80s. Cartoons that they would show the kids to indoctrinate them on Mormon belief, and they are the funniest thing too.
Yeah.
Wow. But it's kind of like what South Park did. It's just a cartoon version of, of course, Christians had their 80s cartoons and stuff that were really bad too.
Yeah, dude. Nah, man, those cartoons were awesome. I remember growing up in Sunday school. I saw an ad recently where they were bringing back. Man, I cannot remember what the name of the company or franchise or whatever it is, but it was the animated Bible stories.
Superbook?
No, it wasn't Superbook. It wasn't like a corny, childish version. It was real.
Okay. Yeah,
if I opened Instagram right now, an ad would probably pop up for it, but I don't remember what it was called.
The old
it
80s anime version of Superbook is incredible. Those are so good.
That actually is one of the reasons anime got popular in the U.S.
Nice.
Was because of that.
Because of the Bible.
Yes. Yeah. Christians just screw up everything.
I learned so much about the Bible from Superbook and Gospel Bill.
Gospel Bill. That was before
Gospel
my
Bill
time.
Came to our church a few years back, and I got to meet him.
Oh, wow.
And I was beside myself. I was like, Gospel Bill. I was calling him Gospel Bill.
That is so cool, man.
But yeah.
That was before my time. We had
pretty fun.
We had one about a donut. There was something
a
about a
donut
shop or something. There was you
had Bible
Adventures in Odyssey and McGee and Me.
I do remember those. Yeah,
is it McGee and Me?
McGee and Me.
Not to be confused with Mac and Me,
which is the movie,
yeah.
the alien movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember all those, man. That's good stuff.
Yeah, dude. Good times.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
No, you remember Salty the Songbook?
Bro, I had a Salty VHS. Bro. That stuff was awesome.
I still have a twitch in my eye from that show. Salty the Songbook.
I still know all those songs. I can quote so many scriptures because of those little catchy tunes.
Oh, man.
There's definitely a place for that stuff.
I think it was Matt Chandler that said one time, he's like, the fact that anybody became a Christian in the 80s and 90s is a testament to God's miraculous work. The content that we were putting out was just so bad.
Oh, wow. Good times.
Yep.
Okay, so we're talking about revisiting content from past episodes. So I don't know. It seems like I had another one. Okay, but yeah, that'll get us into Genesis 3. So something we never explicitly said, or that we never discussed in the previous episode about the serpent, is we discussed the meaning of the word seraphim, the throne guardian, and you have cherubim and seraphim, and the Egyptian origins of those like icons. And so something that I had in my notes for the previous episode is that it says, now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field. Mm-hmm. And later on, when the serpent is cursed, it says it compares him to livestock. Mm-hmm. So people say, oh, it has to be like a snake. It has to be an animal because of the word beast. Yeah. Like it compares him to other beasts.
Beasts of the field, yeah.
And so something that we didn't really discuss is that there wasn't, in the ancient world, there wasn't really a distinction between animals and humans as like beasts. Mm. Like that, like we, again, this is our scientific modern era brain going, oh, they're different species. So when he says beast, he must be talking about animals. But the ancient world would not have seen that as an exclusive statement that the serpent has to be an animal. So, and they didn't really have a distinction between supernatural and natural either, which is really interesting.
Oh, yeah, okay.
To say like people think like, oh, angels or divine intervention or whatever, that's supernatural, which implies it's not natural. It's something outside of nature. Yeah. But the ancient world believed that it was all part of the world they lived in. There was no separation between the supernatural and the natural in their brains.
Right.
Right.
Well, looking at that, I got my interlinear here pulled up because I'm nerdy. I'm sure I'm not going to pronounce this right, but the Hebrew word there for beast is hayat, maybe, I guess.
Okay.
And it really just means a living creature.
Right.
It's just a kind of a broad something that's alive.
Yeah. 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 You think, well, like high school biology, and you learn about species and animal kingdoms and stuff like that. The people who are writing and reading the Bible did not think that way. They did not have those classifications. Yeah. So you can't use the word beast to say, oh, it's a snake, or livestock. You can't.
And see, I've heard this thing about, like and we are different from the animal kingdom for sure. We have the image of God, where we have intelligence and a lot of these things that are, different.
Yeah.
Animals are really smart, just not as smart as us. But I've heard this idea of like, well, animals don't have spirits, or they don't have souls.
This is good. This is a good topic.
But the same exact word that's used for a living being or living soul, when it talks about the creation of Adam, that he breathed life into Adam, and he became a living being or a living spirit. So that word there is the same. I think it's ruach.
Yeah, Hebrew, the word spirit is ruach. The Greek will use the word pneuma.
Yeah.
And it's the same word for animals.
It's the same word that's given to the breath of life for animals as well.
Yeah.
So it's the same spirit, life, breath word.
Off the top of my head, I can already think in Ecclesiastes, when Solomon, or the author of Ecclesiastes, is discussing the futility of, living and trying to be rich and happy and stuff.
Solomon, yeah.
He says, who can say that the spirit of man goes up and the spirit of animal goes down?
Oh, yeah.
So like there wasn't a distinction that he thought that animals had. And in the story of Noah, he says all creatures that have the breath of life in them.
Right. Right.
And
that same breath.
And then another interesting comparison is Genesis 2, when he brings the animals to Adam to be named. The way that it says it is that he made out of the ground. Like the way that he made Adam out of dust, it uses the similar language for animals when he brought them to Adam.
Oh, yeah. So, there's another scripture that says when God was making the creature, it says that he caused the earth to produce living creatures. Yeah. Have you seen that? I'll have to go
it is. It's Genesis 2:19.
Yeah, so where it says he tells the earth to bring forth living things.
Yeah. Genesis 2:18 says it's not good for him to be alone, so I'll make a helper. Verse 19 says, now out of the ground the Lord had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. So again, the distinction between humans and animals, we have to kind of throw out our modern scientific understanding and just know that humans are different because they're made in the image of God.
Right.
Like, it's not about souls and spirits and being formed out of dust and like all the things that people attribute to man, because the ancient world may have thought the same way about animals. Yeah. Being human is being the image of God.
Exactly.
Like and
human is the
Yeah.
the thing.
To be human is to be the image
Because you
of
can
God.
list all these attributes and stuff, we think, or we feel, or we have emotions,
dolphins
it's
and dogs and all kinds of things have
Right,
language and intelligence and
well, even when you start to get like I have a daughter that's special needs, and she has pretty severe autism, and she's got things that don't function like every other human being. Is she still the image of God? It's not a quality that we possess.
Right.
It's a title that we have as human beings.
Yeah. So that's important, and that too with a couple months ago we had the whole Roe v. Wade thing. That's still a big controversy that's going on, and so people talking about life, like babies can't think or talk or whatever, like in the womb or even after they're born,
right?
So like, are they the image of God? Well, yeah, because they're human. It's not because of any capacity for thought or
right. Yeah,
or
so
whatever.
if you lean on that idea that it's some quality or like characteristic that we have, then that doesn't help you.
It is a title.
Right.
The image, to be human, is to be the image of God. And I think it also, we mentioned last time, the whole the belief about graven images and making icons and stuff in Hebrew religion.
Yep.
You couldn't fashion an image in the form of Yahweh, and the implication is that humans are the image of Yahweh, and He communicates with us directly.
Right.
Do
you think that kind of ties in with like our bodies are the temple? It's kind
absolutely.
of that same like theme, that we're the place of worship.
I think
where God dwells.
Man, I would love to go into that deeper on another day, but you look all through the Bible. What I think of is that the Spirit of God is meant to rest on humans.
Yep.
And so look at like the Ark of the Covenant. Everybody knows the story about Uzziah when he touches the Ark and dies.
Yeah.
Well, everybody goes, it was wrong for him to touch the Ark, but really the mistake they made in that story is that they put it on a cart.
It was complete disobedience.
Yeah, it was supposed to be carried on poles on the shoulders of priests.
Right.
And so
would you say that was due to laziness? They're like, we don't want to carry it.
I have another theory. About that.
Like, what if we just put it on a little cart and roll it?
And I'll give y'all. I'll just give it in a brief nutshell. But I think it's a topic for another day. The Ark, before that event happened, was in captivity in Philistia.
Philistia, yeah.
Wherever the Philistines are from, right?
Where they live.
They had defeated Israel in battle and
who
taken
were
the
also
Ark. Giants.
Yes.
So they had captured the Ark in battle.
Yeah.
And a curse came on them. They had plagues of tumors and rats and all kinds of things.
Yes.
And so they put the Ark on a cart with 2 cows or 2 bulls or whatever, and sent it off, and it went in the direction of Israel. So when Israel received it, it was on a cart. So I think they thought like, it's okay to put it on a cart because. And you could even draw a connection like, well, man, Christians shouldn't live like the world. Just because you see the world doing something and it's okay for Christians to do something, that would be how I'd preach it if I were
I heard somebody, this is just a side note, this is some scatological humor right here, is that the tumors that God struck the Philistines with were actually hemorrhoids.
Oh.
Were hemorrhoidal tumors.
Interesting.
Yeah. And didn't he say like go and like fashion like an idol of tumors?
Yes, they had to make
gold and all that.
Yeah, tumors and rats.
So that would just make it even more funny.
That is pretty funny.
They're like make a sculpture of your tumor, your hemorrhoidal tumor.
Well, yeah, I think.
Is this getting cut from the episode?
Oh no, this is good.
Okay, this is gonna stay in. All right,
that's funny. Well, it's all stuff to make people think. And,
right.
But yeah, the mistake was that they put it on a cart. The Ark was meant to be carried on the shoulders of people, and then in the New Testament, what do you see? The Holy Spirit falls on people, and then they say we're the temple of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
So yeah, I think what God has been illustrating over the entire history of humanity is that the Spirit of God was always meant to dwell on or with people.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's that sermon.
And that's getting
join us next week.
Right. And that's getting back to the Genesis or the Garden of Eden situation where God was with humanity.
Yes.
Like physically
they were in
there.
God's house.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was the going back. It's always like going back to what he originally intended.
Yeah.
And even through sin and the falls of man and the angels and stuff that we'll talk about later, like God still wanted to be with his people, even though they were sinful. He made a way to do that without obliterating everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, man, depending on how much we talk right now, we might even get to that today. I mean, the curse and the being expelled from Eden, that's the end of chapter 3, so I don't know how far we'll get, but
yeah.
Revisiting what I was going to say a little while ago about the whole beasts thing, we never gave our opinions in the previous episode. Do you think the serpent, the shining one in Genesis 3, was a humanoid figure or an actual serpent figure? I think this is an interesting topic because we talked about the definition of seraphim and cherubim and nakash, and we talked about all that, giving the literary value and the impact of that word and that cultural definition, right? But like when you read the story of Genesis 3, do you see it as a humanoid angelic figure, or do you see it as a snake or a,
now I do not see it as a snake at all.
Okay.
Like no reptilian features whatsoever. There is precedent, I think, for a serpentine-like nature, maybe. Not sure on that, though, but I think the serpent imagery was for Moses' audience.
Yeah.
And what the serpent represented and the beings that the serpents were, like the cherubim and seraphim, the burning ones, the shining ones, and all that. I'm not too sure, but I'm leaning very heavily on like what Alberino says. He's like, he thinks that the angels and the divine council is like our elder brother, and like that we look like them.
Yeah.
Because I mean, anytime you see an angel in the Bible, they look like men.
They look like dudes.
Yeah. And whether they're taking that form on, I don't know. I don't know why they would have to change their form from, other than just to not freak us out or something maybe. But I mean, people were still freaked out anyway.
Yeah.
Because they were shiny and in some instances, and then they're just like normal looking, but they were described as men, like human looking people.
Yeah. Like the story about Sodom and Gomorrah when Abraham or Abram
dudes.
and Lot see the Lord and they see angels. They'd say men approached them.
Right. Well, even the angels that come and roll the stone away at Jesus' gravesite, like they were brilliant and they were shining, it goes back to that, that whole thing of like these beings are shiny in some instances, with brilliant clothing or white in apparel, but they were still described as men, like they look like people.
Yeah, and really, off the top of my head, the only time I can think of angels being described as anything other than humanoid, like even wings, people always think about like the illustrations of angels having wings and stuff.
Wings are never mentioned with angels.
Whenever people see them in person, they don't. They just look like guys.
Yeah.
But like Isaiah's vision, where he said, "I saw seraphim standing above, and they had wings covering their feet and their head and all that."
Right.
Like you get the wing illustration there, and that's more of a symbolic. That's a vision that he's having, right? He's describing a vision. And so I think that's interesting, the distinction between like the way that the authors of the Bible describe them. They use again, we mentioned genres and literary devices and stuff last time. They use certain language to explain to the audience what they're seeing or trying to teach. But when you get these more historical genres, like in Genesis, like Abraham seeing the angels, they just say that men approached.
Yeah.
They're just described like guys.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I'm the same. I've always read Genesis 3 as like just a snake. He's hanging out of a limb on a tree, and he's looking down, talking to Eve, like, "Hey, eat this fruit up here." But I kind of like the idea of him just being a humanoid figure that was brilliant, you know. And that we do the same thing today. If you call someone a snake, you know that they mean that person is shifty or false or whatever.
Yeah.
So the Bible could just be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
It could be saying this was an angel or a divine being, and it's using the seraphim language, the nakash language, that, you know.
Yep. Well, even Jesus uses that term when he calls the Pharisees a brood of vipers.
He does, yeah.
And which they probably would have been very offended by that because they know what the serpent and the viper
well,
represented.
He says, "You're the sons of your
You're
father,
the sons
the devil."
of your father, the devil, bro. That's
so that
like
was exactly what came to their minds.
Brutal. They were serpent seed.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and that's just one of those things. You know, this whole Sunday school indoctrination idea that like everybody reads it and it's a snake talking to Eve, and you never, I don't know, you until a year or 2 years ago or so, I didn't ever even stop to think like it could have just been like a humanoid figure, an angel.
Right. Well, it's going back to this. We can't take the Bible literally on every single point that's in it. Like, not everything is literal. And when I say literal, not as in literature, but as in it actually being like exactly real, what it says.
Exactly.
Existing that way.
Yeah.
And it can be both. It can be both.
Because I told y'all I was going to say that every episode.
Right. You need to get your T-shirt. It can be both.
It can be both.
I was listening to Alberino today on Blurry Creatures, and he was talking about like the symbology of those creatures, like the seraphim and cherubim, how they have the eyes all over, Yeah. Ezekiel describes them as these weird, like 4 faces and all different kind of animals and hooves and wings and eyes
covered
all over.
In eyeballs.
And he's like, the whole thing is to get you to think a certain way. He's not saying this is a crazy, like, amalgamational being, with all these things put together, and it's trying to communicate theological themes.
Yeah.
And the thing that he talked about, all the eyes, he's like, the watchers watch.
They watch.
You need eyes to watch. And the watchers is a biblical term. That's not something just out of Enoch. Like in Daniel, the book of Daniel, it calls those beings watchers.
Oh, yeah.
I think just taking that stuff too literal sometimes can get you into weird things.
I think that it's also a weakness of coming to modern English.
Right, true.
Because you mentioned Ezekiel and the eyes and the living creatures and stuff. I don't even read those as like covered in actual eyeballs anymore.
Yeah,
I picture stars. And it's because in Hebrew or ancient literature, there's a connection between divine being and stars. We've already talked about that at length in this podcast.
Well, even that
Being
goes
shiny.
along with they're always watching. They're over us.
Yeah.
They're above us and looking down, and kind of the whole like a watchman.
Yeah.
Like somebody that's on the top of the wall and they watch.
Yeah. I think it just means that they're glowy and shiny, and there's some connections in Ezekiel in that chapter. The 4 faces he mentions are actually connected to the Babylonian zodiac. It represents like time and seasons. Genesis 1 says that the stars and the sun and moon would be signs for seasons and times.
Yeah.
So the 4 faces in Ezekiel are actually the 4 points of the Babylonian zodiac, which is the time period Ezekiel would have been written in.
Yeah, north, south, east, west, like that, and that doesn't get away from the whole idea of a watchman. Like, they see everywhere. They
all
see
times,
all
over.
They're watching.
And the Lord's throne was riding on these creatures, so it represents him being dominant, like over time. The word for eyes, I believe, is ayin. Ayin, I don't know how to say it. I don't know Hebrew, but if you look it up, like in a Strong's Concordance or something, it's going to say that it means eyes.
Yeah.
But it seems like I remember studying this somewhere. They pointed out that there is a connection that can be used for stars. Like, think about, we talk about like stars twinkling, and like in romance literature, you might say like, oh, your eyes sparkle like stars, right?
Yeah.
Like we do the same thing in English.
The Song of Solomon has a lot of like stuff like that.
But we make the same kind of allusions in English, and so again with the zodiac connection and like literal stars for seasons, the word ayin that gets translated eyes, like the wheels were covered in eyes. I think it's later in like verse 16 or something of that chapter. It's actually used multiple times before that, and it never gets translated as eyes. It gets translated as like shining, glowing. And so, so
that goes back to what we've been talking about with these beings.
Yeah, I think that's a great example.
Just a disclaimer for people who want to dive into this stuff a little more. I think you brought up a good example with it. Oh, it just means eyes. Like your commentaries and your concordances and all that, they're not always going to give you the proper. They're good. And I'm using one right now, but they're not always going to give you the full picture.
Yep.
A lot of these concordances and commentaries are coming from a certain camp or a certain way of thinking, and they're going to give you their view.
If you use like I mentioned Strong's Concordance, it's just going to give you a 1-to-1 definition.
Right.
Like this is the word in Hebrew or Greek.
Right.
This is the word in English.
Right.
It does not really go in a lot of depth about how it's used.
Now, what's good about that is you can cross-reference. Okay,
Yeah.
what is this word? Where is it used elsewhere? Because
Yeah.
you can see, okay, it means eyes right here. But, oh, look, over here it was used, and it means something different.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
So, yeah, some of those things you just got to
It's all reading the Bible in its own context.
learn how to do, learn
and
how to
remembering
navigate.
that, like, multiple people worked on the Bible over thousands of years.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, if you read the book of Genesis and there's a word, this is something that, like, I'm trying to pay attention to now. If the book of Genesis, or I guess you could say the whole Pentateuch that we believe Moses wrote, if a word gets used a certain way in the first 5 books of the Bible, we can assume that those authors, or single author, whatever you believe, they would have used that word a particular way. If the same word gets used, like in Isaiah may have used it differently.
Right. Yeah.
Because that would have been way later, and it
Right.
would have been a different author and a
Right.
different audience or different context. So, like, you can't go, oh, every time this word is used in the Bible, it means this.
Right.
And another fallacy is trying to, like, pick all the definitions of a word. Like, just because a word can mean something doesn't mean that's what it means.
Right.
Like,
well, Elohim is a great example.
Yeah.
And I shared a meme on Instagram where it was like, Elohim means God. And it's got this guy like smiling.
Yeah.
And it's like, Elohim means God, gods, little g gods,
Yeah.
angels, human dead. And he's like going crazy. But yeah, it's a great example of like,
Yeah.
context and
'Cause, people will
culture.
People will build all kinds of, doctrines just on that idea that, like, oh, this word, it can mean this, so
Yeah.
maybe that's what.
Right.
Or what they do is they look at, like, if a word has 3 or 4 definitions, they try to find like a common meaning, and that's dangerous too, because you don't want to dilute. Like, you want to take each thing in its own context.
Yeah, and that actually makes me think of when I can't remember the person exactly, but it was kind of the new age, not new age, but kind of the what do they call it, the emergent church thing in the early 90s, and they were saying like they were pushing this idea that, oh, well, virgin in the Bible doesn't really mean virgin. It just means young maiden, just a young person. And so there wasn't anything miraculous about Jesus' birth,
Right.
which they were true. It can mean young girl, so it can mean maiden. I think the word is patula. But yeah, just how they can like navigate that and use, oh, well, it doesn't really mean that.
Yep. You got to be real careful.
Yeah.
Let the context of the Bible, let the Bible
Right.
define itself. I mean, don't try to get your own meaning and whatever out of it. I remember I love blueletterbible.com. That's one of my favorite websites.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to search for a passage and find the roots of certain words
the
and
one
stuff.
I'm using is Bible Hub.
Bible
it's
Hub,
kinda
they
like
do pretty
Blue Letter.
good.
Yeah,
They do what'd you call it? Interlinear.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I always use is interlinear.
So those are good websites to use. But like, I always keep in mind, if I go to Blue Letter Bible and look up a particular word, it'll give you the Strong's reference and all the times that word is used in the whole Bible.
Right.
And I remember when I started doing that, thinking like, man, I have mastered Bible study. Like, this is next level stuff. And now I realize, like, that is not how you study the Bible.
No, yeah,
like, it's educational and it's beneficial, but it doesn't give you context.
Right.
The one-for-one definition, Hebrew to English or Greek to English,
Right,
doesn't always
right.
it doesn't give you
always
the
work that way,
context.
yeah.
So just be careful. I'm just saying, be careful. But please, audience, feel free to use those resources. Those are great resources. So.
Yeah. Heiser has a great teaching. I think he's got a couple of books out about like how to study the Bible. And I love how he differentiates between studying the Bible is completely different than reading the Bible.
Yeah.
You can read the Bible and get great things out of it, and we're supposed to read the Bible, but studying the Bible...
We are supposed to read the
right,
Bible, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. But like studying it is like really, like, let's really get down. I mean, it's the whole like milk versus meat. Like,
Yeah.
you read it and then study it.
Yeah.
Or maybe you should study it and then read it.
I'm gonna go back to bashing Bible reading plans.
Should we read the Bible and then study, or should we study to actually understand what we're reading?
See, that's what I find. I started the year doing a reading plan, like a daily reading plan, and now I still study the Bible every day, but I don't find that I'm on any kind of plan right now. I'm looking up certain topics,
Yeah.
and I spend a lot of time reading scripture, but it's to learn stuff like this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're right. There's a distinction between like, let me do my daily reading and like, let me actually go in depth and study and find commentaries and find, I think you need both.
Right. Okay. That's what I was getting at. Like, is it really worth reading if you don't even really understand what you're reading? You know what I mean?
I think that reading plans build familiarity. So in a previous episode, we talked about how Christians don't always commit to memory large enough chunks of the Bible to know. I'll tell you, one of my weakest things is like the prophets, like major and minor prophets in the Bible. And so many of the things that I've learned recently has been going into New Testament passages and finding the Old Testament references. Like I mentioned, John chapter 10, Jesus is quoting Psalms in John chapter 10.
Psalm 82.
And that's why they thought that he was blaspheming. They thought he was calling himself God because of the way that he responded to their questions. They were like, no, wait, that's a psalm about Yahweh. Like, that's not about a human,
Yeah, how dare you?
Yeah, so...
Like Greta what's her name? Greta Thunberg? How dare you, Jesus?
How dare you?
Somebody should make a meme of that, like a Pharisee with like a Greta face on it. How dare you, Jesus?
Well, yeah, that's one of my things. So, yeah, I think reading plans are important. I think just reading the Bible builds familiarity. When you see something, you're going to go, I've seen that before in Isaiah. I've seen that before in Psalms. I've seen that before in Exodus. But just memorizing Scripture or recognizing Scripture that's not depth.
Right.
So, like, you should also look at commentaries and scholarly articles, and there's all kinds of free classes. You can go on YouTube and find free lectures and stuff.
Oh, there's tons of content. Tons. Yeah, it's just sifting through it and finding the good ones.
Well, we're 30 minutes in, and we haven't talked about Genesis 3 yet. This is actually becoming more of a Bible study topic than
now the serpent
Genesis
was
3.
more cunning than any other beast.
This is a skirt. This is a hard right turn.
Let's get to verse 2 at least.
Okay.
At least.
So let's see what we got here.
So he was more cunning. So he was really like smart. He was really crafty.
Well, that's how we got on that topic.
Wise
we were
as
saying
serpents.
he's more crafty than any other beast. So they're like, oh, he's obviously a snake because it says he's more crafty than any beast. But that's not an animal. That doesn't mean animal. It just means being or creature, right?
He was a lot smarter than everybody else.
Yes. It also says that the Lord God had made him. So like that. That's another part that a lot of people go, oh, see, it says any beast of the field that the Lord God had made. So, and it's like, yes, the Lord also made divine beings.
Yes.
Like, yes. So that's not exclusive.
Right.
He said, did you actually say you shall not eat of any tree of the garden? And the woman replied, we may eat of any tree in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said, you will not surely die, for God knows when you eat of it, your eyes will become opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So I think that's a good place to pause for now. I mean, do we want to... in studying this topic, I've seen a lot of people discuss the language, the interchange between the serpent and Eve. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that because I'm really more interested in talking about the tree itself. But just quickly, what I have seen a lot of people point out is the serpent wasn't lying. He said, did God really say you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? And she said, no, we can eat of the trees in the garden. Right. And then what people point out is that Eve actually amended God's command. She, and a lot of people compare it to like kind of a man-made, self-righteous, self-exaltation. She said, we can't even touch it. Yeah. And what people say is, well, what happens is she realized I can touch it and not die. Maybe I can also eat it and not die. So I don't want to really draw anything from that and go in depth on it. I just thought it was interesting.
Maybe so, maybe not. Yeah, and I think just the second part of verse 1 there, did God really say?
Did God really say?
Like, it's just putting it in the mind. Think about it. Like
he was trying to get her to deconstruct her Christianity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was exactly what he was doing because they knew what God said. Yeah, they heard him. He was there with them. He told them. And it's just this questioning God. Yeah. We can question or postulate questions to God, and we can question, hey, what are you doing in this moment? Where am I going? What's going on? Yeah. But questioning him in the sense of like the serpent does here, where he knows what God said,
Yeah.
you know, and it's questioning from a background of rebellion. And this is kind of the roots of Luciferianism here.
Yeah.
Is this idea that, well, God was the bad guy.
Yes.
God is the tyrant.
You know who else says that?
Who's that?
Progressive Christians.
Oh, well,
They're
there you go.
I've heard progressive Christians say that the God in this story in the Old Testament is different from Jesus.
Right.
And that this God was trying to hold back, you know,
Right.
information or
And if you don't know
knowledge
what
or whatever.
Luciferianism is, it's kind of this it's this flipped approach to the biblical narrative of God being good and loving, and you know, the devil, or whatever you want to call him, the rebel, is, you know, the bad guy. It's just a flip of that.
Yeah.
Now, it's not like Satanism. Satanism would say, I don't know if they really believe this, but they would say, you know, oh, we don't believe in these things. We just use Satan as a symbol of self-awareness and self-freedom and self-governance, you know, that he was this symbol that we use.
So Satanists don't necessarily believe in an actual Satan, but
well,
Luciferians
they say
do.
that.
Okay. Yeah.
I think real Satanists
You think it's a
would
front?
say, yes, I think it's a front, but
That's like Mormons trying to get you with the gospel, and then
yeah,
you realize,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
wait,
exactly.
y'all do
Yeah,
not
wait,
believe the
that's
same
not the
thing as me.
gospel. That's not the gospel.
Yeah.
But yeah, Luciferian is this idea, and a lot of Gnostics, and there's a big conspiracy thing that's just so much fun that goes down multiple rabbit holes of this idea, that Luciferian doctrine of this idea that God is the bad guy, the devil is the good guy. He's the one that wants to give man knowledge
Yeah.
and wisdom, which goes right into Genesis 6 with the Watchers giving.
That story gets repeated over and over in the
Right.
Bible. It's crazy.
And this whole idea of Luciferianism, God's the bad guy, is what a lot of people will postulate as being the rulers of the world, you know, the kind of the Illuminati type idea. Like, that is what they hold to. They hold that God is the bad guy, Satan, the rebel, he's the good guy. He wants to give us, you know, wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy because the serpent says in verse 5, God knows when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil.
Right, that's true.
And later on, when they're cast out of the garden, the Lord says, you know, they can't stay here lest they take from it says, look, they've become like us, knowing good and evil.
Right.
So
really the only lie that he told, as far as I can understand, might have to backtrack a little, but is in verse 4. He says, you won't die.
Yeah. So that is interesting.
Now, whether he's saying like you won't die immediately or you won't die at all, I don't know.
Well, let me look back in chapter 2 real quick, because that's what a lot of people have an issue with Christianity because of this, or I guess and Judaism, but because the Lord said,
the day that you eat of it, you will die.
Genesis 2:17, not of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil shall you eat, because in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. And so a lot of people say, well, they didn't drop dead, so God was lying. This is fake, you know, whatever. Right. But people who, again, scholars and people who spend time studying this and stuff, they'll tell you that's judgment language. That's a death sentence. It doesn't mean you're going to drop dead the second you eat it.
It doesn't say your body is going to physically die.
It says you will surely die.
Yeah.
You know, and
even though he could have done that. He could have killed them instantly, and that would have been just. But
this is where I get my gospel message in here. I was going to save this for the end, but this is what we're talking about.
Yeah. When you say gospel message,
this
you talking about the proto-evangelion there in verse 15, or no?
Verse 15 being, let's see.
That's what
I'll put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. We're not even to the curses yet.
Yeah. Well, this one, a lot of scholars will say is the proto-evangelion. It's the first gospel message. Yeah. When God says, hey, you're going to be overtaken by her seed.
Okay, well then, all right, then let's put a pin in that, and I won't say yet what I was going to say, because it's kind of the climax of this.
Gotcha.
But but yeah, it's sentencing language, and other places in the Bible use that language. I think in Hebrew, if you, what's the word, transliterate, like make it literal in English, I think what God says in Genesis 2 is that like, you will die dead or something. You will dead.
Right.
It sounds silly when you say it in English, but the format of the language in Genesis 2 is a death sentence. Yeah. You will die. You will surely die when you eat this. And a lot of people say, well, they die spiritually. They died spiritually, not physically. But we're going to give some other explanations in just a second.
Kind of like cutting the lifeline from God's presence. And if you're not connected to life, you're going to be dead.
Well, and they were. They did not have access to the tree of life anymore.
Right.
They were not in God's presence anymore. Yeah, so they did essentially die.
Yeah.
It also brings up the question, like, were they innately immortal? Or were they mortal and they were granted life?
They were chomping on that tree of life.
Did they have to eat from the tree of life? Did that rejuvenate them or whatever? Or was just being in God's presence, did that sustain them?
Yeah.
Like, were Adam and Eve mortal? Like that's because everybody thinks,
was it really a tree?
We do not have time to talk about that today.
Yeah, well, I mean, that makes sense. You know, if there's a tree of life and they have access to it, and he says, hey, you can partake of these trees.
Yeah.
And you can partake of this tree of life,
yeah,
whatever that is.
And their judgment, the sentence was
to get them away from it.
You no longer have access to the tree of life.
So,
It is interesting. Again, I don't know if modern day English speaking Christians, if people read Genesis 3 that way, but that's a thought that comes to my head. Like maybe Adam and Eve were not innately of themselves immortal.
Yeah.
And they were sustained by being in God's presence and by having access to the tree of life.
Very logical, yeah.
You know, it could be like kind of like we joked, I think in a previous episode, like could Adam stub his toe? I mean, he's out there gardening. Do you think he never like pulled a muscle or anything? Maybe he could eat from the tree of life and be healed immediately or something, you know?
Yeah. Or like an aloe plant, like take it off and like rub it on the skin or something.
Yeah, maybe so.
Essential oils. If you partake of the essential oil tree, you can live forever.
Oh, man.
The tree of essentials.
Oh, you're going to get some people triggered now, man. I know some Christians that
No, we're
going to
talk about essential oils when we get to New Age.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Oh, no, essential oil's good. God made
we are
oil.
not. I was going to say, we're not. Let me disclaimer, we're not saying don't use essential oils.
That's called a joke.
That's an interesting, that is a discussion for another day.
No, God made oil, so
they're
essential.
I think that this is a good, before we get to the proto-evangelion and all that stuff, let's talk for a few minutes about the language, the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. What does that represent? So there's a few interpretations for the name of the tree. And again, I think a lot of people just take it for granted because you've heard this story since you were 2 years old. But the name is very interesting. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so the first question is, like the tree itself is not bad, right?
Right.
It has the word evil in it, but it's not like the tree was in the garden. God made all this stuff and called it good. So the tree by itself is not necessarily bad, right? I think that it gets a bad rep because of what happens when Adam and Eve disobey.
Right. Well, it's like fire. Fire's a good thing, but it can be very dangerous as well.
Fire in the fireplace is good.
Yeah, right. And keep it in the right spot. Well, even the serpent here, you know, the devil says, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk about that real quick there, because you know what that sentence says in Hebrew is you'll be like Elohim.
Elohim, yeah.
And so
you'll be like one of us.
Depending on what translation you read, it doesn't always say capital G God.
Right.
It could mean like Yahweh. It could mean like you could be gods, or you could be like the gods.
Yeah.
And so the serpent, being the brilliant, shining, angelic figure that he is,
you could be just like me,
you'll be like me.
Yeah.
You know? And if you think like this is God's house, obviously the Nakash is there. There could have been other divine beings walking around the garden.
What do you think about the temptation of not being content? So it seems like he's tempting them with not being content with what they were and what their title was and, being human or being in dominion of the earth or being in his image, because it seems like the Watchers, of course we'll get to that later, but the book of Enoch and even Genesis 6 kind of alludes to this idea that the Watchers were not content where they were.
Yeah, well...
And that they coveted what humanity had.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's this idea of like, I'm not content with what God has given me and made me to be. I want what others have.
Yeah, well, I think it's the book of Jude, when it revisits that Genesis 6 story, it says that they left their appointed place.
Their proper place, yeah.
And so the reason they were judged is because they got out of line.
Right.
Basically.
And so I see that allusion here, that it's just funny that it connects in that way, that this serpent character, this devil character is pushing this idea of like not being content with what God has done and said.
He's like saying you are Adam, you are man, but you could be Elohim.
You could be like the divine council.
Yes,
you could be like one of us. And then that same temptation that the Watchers followed through with in Genesis 6.
Yeah.
They wanted wives. They wanted what man had.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting.
An interesting parallel that I find is the story of like Sarah and Abraham not being able to have kids, and she says, take Hagar and have a kid with her.
Yeah.
And that will be your heir. Mm-hmm. And everybody preaches this sermon all the time, that like that represents your earthly way of trying to fulfill God's promise and not letting God do it his way. In researching this, what a lot of people have said is there's no indication that God was never going to let them in on knowledge. But he wanted to be the one
to give it to him.
He wanted them to focus on him and so by taking from the tree directly, they were usurping, or they were like, going against God's authority and saying, I'm going to access this myself.
What if it was usurpanting?
Oh, little play of words there. That was good. But they were going out of order against God.
Yeah.
Maybe he would have given them knowledge over time or in the future or something, but he would have been the source.
Yeah.
But they went around God and got it from the tree.
Right.
And the serpent was the one that talked them into doing that.
So up to this point, was the serpent, definitely he had some ulterior motives, but what is the knowledge of the good and the evil that this tree represented?
Okay, yeah. Well, the language is very interesting, because the word good and evil there does not necessarily mean like righteousness and wickedness. Mm-hmm. The word evil there is ra. Mm-hmm. In Hebrew, ra just means bad, harmful, destructive. It can mean wicked, like it can mean immoral.
Kind of like a tornado.
Yeah.
A tornado can do a lot of damage. It's not morally evil.
Yes.
It's just something that happens.
So earlier we talked about reading things in context. So in the book of Genesis, some other examples of the word ra is Genesis 37, when they sell Joseph into slavery, his brothers, and they bring the coat to Jacob. And he says, it's my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. The word fierce animal, fierce is the word ra. It's a harmful animal.
Something that's a calamity has happened,
Genesis 41, when Joseph interprets the Pharaoh's dream, he says that there were seven cows, ugly and thin. The word ugly is ra. Mm-hmm. In Job chapter 2, when Job's wife says to curse God and die, he says, you speak as one of the foolish women. Shall we not receive good from God and also receive ra? And it gets interpreted evil, but Job is saying God gives us blessing, but why can't I also expect like harm or destruction or whatever? Why would I question God just because something bad happened?
Yeah.
So it's not God doing something wicked or immoral.
Right.
It's God putting a hardship against somebody.
So you think, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, maybe since it's not necessarily saying it's a moral good and evil, but maybe like an all-encompassing knowledge.
Yes.
And that this divine being, of the original rebel here, the Satan, is saying you can have all the knowledge that we have. Yeah, and it kind of ties into that whole, you could be like a divine being, a god like us.
Yeah, there is some evidence in ancient literature, and coincidentally Egyptian, because we talked last week about context, that Moses and the children of Israel would have been in Egypt for 400 years.
Right.
So the phrasing knowledge of good and evil it could just mean knowledge of everything.
Right.
Good and bad, everything.
So
it's just like a idiom or whatever.
A quality that only God really has.
Yeah, knowledge of
everything. He knows
everything.
everything.
Another interesting interpretation that I had, and I've heard some people allude to this, but I looked to see if I could find some research on this, and I didn't find anything real conclusive. But I kind of think that it's also named because of the result of they experienced God's good in being in creation and being in God's presence, but when they disobeyed God, they experienced disaster.
Yeah.
And so they had that word knowledge. It doesn't just mean to know something. It also can mean to like know by experience or to know intimately.
Yeah.
So like in Greek, for instance, if you read the Septuagint, it's the word ginosko, and that is an idiom for like intercourse. When the Old Testament says Adam knew his wife and had a son.
Right.
That word to know means to like know intimately or to experience something. Right. So it could just be that they experienced good and evil because they disobeyed God.
Yeah.
And then if you see the serpent as a rebel, and he's saying you could be like us, knowing good and evil, well, he was rebelling against God too. So he was telling the truth. You'll be like me. You'll be on the good team and the bad team if you do this.
Yeah.
So like that's one way to look at it.
Because nothing had happened to him.
Yeah.
He was in the garden.
Not yet.
He was chilling. Like at that point, he's like, "Hey, look, I'm doing this. Look at me. I'm fine." It's almost this idea of like, "Hey, you can do this too, and it'll be all right.
Yeah.
You're not gonna die. Look at me."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm all shiny and stuff.
They literally experienced God's good. And they experienced destruction.
So that kind of gives you, I think, this thinking about these kind of topics in this way, kind of gives you more of a sympathetic view to Adam and Eve. That like it was put in such a way like here it is, black and white, choose good or bad. You know, it was like it was this really cunning. I mean, it says that he was smart.
Dude, the devil uses the same tricks on us today. I mean, think about people that fall into sexual sin or financial, like misuse money and get, their life ends up in disaster because of it.
Yeah.
It's always a slippery slope. It's not always this like jump off the cliff.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't this, check box 1 or 2. It was like, hey, you can do both. It'll be fine.
Yeah,
like,
the devil tempts people the same way. Is it really?
So
perfect example. I was talking to someone about this the other day that like we were talking about Christian kids growing up sheltered and like, for instance, let's just say alcohol.
Yeah.
Like, oh, alcohol's bad. Don't touch alcohol. Yeah. Then they go off to college and go, I can drink alcohol and not die.
Nuts.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. But it's like, oh, this didn't kill me. Maybe I can also blank. And they experienced because they started pushing that boundary.
Right.
So yeah, it's the slippery slope. The devil tempts people the same way now that he did Adam and Eve. And then experience, so it could literally mean knowledge. They knew, it granted them some knowledge that they didn't have before. It could mean they experienced good and evil. It could be both, because that's my catchphrase now. I think that one key that people skip over, just again taking this for granted because you've heard this 100 times, the conjunction "and" is inclusive, good and evil. And so remember last week we talked about God separating light and dark, and he says the light was good. He separated the light from the darkness. And we compared it to the Babylonian creation myth of chaos being destroyed, right? And we said that God is creating order out of chaos. He's creating light and separating from dark. He's, death is bad, life is good. So there's this separation. Yeah. So the word "and" is actually very important because it's not good or evil. It's good and evil.
Right.
What God tried to separate, Adam and Eve tried to have both. I think that's kind of what you were just saying.
Yeah. Well, look at verse 6. I'm reading out of the NET, but and I'd like to look up what this word is in the Hebrew, but it says, when the woman saw that the tree produced fruit and it was good for food, it was attractive to her eyes and was desirable for making one wise.
Yeah.
So the idea of good and evil, that knowledge is something that's connected to being wise.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's more of like not this moral good and evil. It's this all-encompassing knowledge of knowing things.
Yeah.
And being informed. But yeah, I'd like to see what that word "wise" is there in But yeah, I think it's just it paints a clearer picture. I think, at least in my mind. That,
you can't just speed read this. Like let's think about literally, like we're breaking it down. The word knowledge means this. The word good means this. The word and means this. The word evil means this. Right? Like you can get super complicated. I think all three of those definitions go together. I think it gave them knowledge that they didn't have before. They did experience good blessing and destruction because of it.
Yeah.
And they had both things in their life, things that God tried to separate. They were now a mixture of good and evil. Yeah. And because God is without mixture, God is light, God is holy, they could not live in the presence of God with this mixture. And I've heard people say, well, it was cruel. Why did God cast them out? Mm-hmm. And man, a really good explanation that I heard was that it was God's judgment and his mercy, because two things would have happened. They could not live in the presence of God because his wrath, right? They would have died. They could not be in the presence of a holy God because of their rebellion. Mm-hmm. So his wrath, by expelling them from the garden, that was mercy. But it was also because they felt guilt and shame. Remember, they hid. It says they heard him walking in the garden and they hid. So they felt shame because they knew that they had rebelled against God. Mm-hmm. And so it was also mercy by saying, I'm not going to force you to live in my house with this. And then think about when he says, lest they take from the tree of life and live forever. Like they've become like us, they can't take from the tree of life. Well, what if they had been immortal with that guilt? Like that, I don't think anybody ever thinks about it that way. And I was listening to, it was a podcast or something. I was researching this topic and I came across somebody saying that like it was God's mercy, because if they had been immortal and been in God's presence with that shame, that would have been hell. Yeah. Like that would have literally been hell. Yeah.
Do you think that's where maybe the sentencing of the gods comes in Psalm 82, where God says you're going to die like men?
Yeah.
Almost
they're cast out of God's presence.
Yeah,
right?
It's like they weren't meant to die, but he's going to make sure they do. That word wise there in verse 6 is Strong's 79:19. So it's I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. Sackle, or whatever that is. To be prudent, it means to show oneself being attentive, or to learn, or just to gain understanding.
Yeah.
And you can look over on the side here. There's like all the places that it's been used, to be wittingly, to prosper, or to gain in some kind of way. So you can see kind of where that Luciferian doctrine ties into this. Yeah. Like he was just trying to give them knowledge so they could understand, all this stuff.
And that's really glorifying and worshiping yourself over, again, if the illustration here is that maybe God would have given them knowledge or whatever they wanted, but he wanted them to come to him.
Right.
Instead of going around him.
Right. Well, the main problem is that God said something and they broke what he said not to do. No matter what his, idea was it to keep knowledge from them, or was it to like give it to them down the road? It doesn't matter. The fact that they broke the command of God is the reason that we're in the mess that we're in.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people, like if you're looking in your Bible and it has the heading "the fall," I don't like that language, because it is a rebellion.
Right, it's a rebellion.
They said, "Oh, we know we're not supposed to do this, and we're going to do it because we want blank outcome."
Exactly. It's kind of like my kids. Like I give them rules that are not to keep them from doing something bad. It's just, hey, this is a rule. Like, I don't know, we don't watch TV past 9 p.m. Okay, that's a rule. Okay, like. I want you to get to bed. I want you to get some sleep. You got school tomorrow, whatever. It's not that it's a moral evil that they would watch TV past 9 p.m., but if I was to catch them, past their bedtime watching TV, they're going to get in trouble. That's a rule that you broke.
Yeah. The fall just sounds so passive.
Right.
And it's not a passive action in this story.
Right.
And I think that a lot of people in modern times, I don't know, because of guilt or shame, or they don't want to face their own actions or the results of them or whatever, but like we are sinners and our sin is rebellion. Just a lot of people don't want to talk about it like that.
No, they don't. No.
It's that's not me. God knows my heart. It's like, yeah, he does. He sure does.
Yeah, he does.
And you cannot, if you're living in open rebellion against God, you cannot live in his garden.
And I think that's even a testament. So you see the shame that they experience. They immediately feel shame.
Yeah.
And guilt. And I think that's a tool that we can use, because a lot of times, like people that talk about the Bible and, and its inspiration and stuff like that, I think this is one of the proofs that the Bible was inspired by God. Mm-hmm. That if man, it was all, strictly a man thing to write the Bible and to create all these things. Man doesn't like talking about how he fails, and all of the shame and the guilt, and that man doesn't like that. Like if we were to write a biography about ourselves, like I think we would leave a lot of that guilt and shame out. You know? We would talk about how cool we are and how smart we were and how, all these things we did. Yeah, we might have like slipped up a couple times, but that's no big deal. Like we were these great people. Just that's how man's nature is. But the fact that the Bible really shows us the deep depths of our depravity and kind of a testament to like it's inspired by God. Like he wanted us to know that. Yeah,
it's not so whitewashed.
Right.
If it was just right. Yeah. Well, so this has been very, very good. I feel like. So we talked about the tree. We talked about the exchange between the serpent and Eve, and in the first half of the episode, we got all kinds of things about reading the Bible and fun stuff. So and studying. So I think we're still not done with Genesis 3.
No.
I think in the next episode
we went down to what, verse 6-ish?
Yeah.
Not bad.
So what we'll do is, because you mentioned the gospel being in or we both did, the gospel being in Genesis 3.
Yeah, the first gospel message, yeah.
And so we're going to touch on that. We're going to touch on what the curses were. Actually, the first messianic prophecy is here.
Yeah.
And so I think in the next episode we'll cover all of that, the exchange between the Lord and Adam and Eve and the serpent. Mm-hmm. And that might wrap up Genesis 3 for us in the next episode.
We might get through it.
Yeah. I mean, this is just such a fascinating topic, and there's so much to draw from it. So, I mean, I'm not in a hurry.
Yeah, and I think it's a good way to show people that, hey, Bible reading and Bible study is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, and there's more to it than what we just read in our little daily Bible reading.
Yeah, I think everyone should challenge themselves, this week after you listen to this episode. If you're doing a daily reading plan, make it a goal to find something weird or find something you don't understand, and spend 30 minutes or spend some time just looking it up. Don't. A lot of times I feel like we check it off our list and maybe make a little, even if you're making a little journal entry like, oh, this is encouraging, I'm going to apply it this way or whatever. But like, take some time studying the context and get that. It's, I think the Bible is just a lot more colorful and it makes sense more than what people realize, and so,
and don't be afraid to like venture outside of the Bible.
Yeah.
Of course you want to be careful. You want to get good counsel, the things you do read and consume, but venture out a little bit, like study what that culture and society was whenever that Bible book you're reading or passage you're reading, was. And it can give you some insight.
You can find scholarly stuff. You can, like, there are pastors that apply some of this stuff to their message. I mean, find somebody that you can listen to on YouTube or something in your free time or whatever.
I mean, we know a few people.
Yeah.
Of course, Dr.
We've named
Heiser.
a few.
We've named Dr. Heiser every episode.
Yeah.
Dr. Michael Heiser.
Derek Gilbert.
Derek Gilbert's another one that we've really liked and enjoyed a lot lately. I love Alberino. Timothy Alberino is so good.
That's a little less exegetical, though, and it's more...
Right. He speculates a lot, but his speculation, he always pulls back to being grounded biblically, which I really enjoy about his stuff. I like some of Josh Peck's stuff. Peck's got some cool stuff.
He's very smart, very good. And he's on the same network as Gilbert, isn't he?
Gilbert, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because, like, man, just give them a shot. Like, some of these people, they're going to say things and they're going to, their programs look and sound a certain way to where you're like, I don't know about this. But it's, Like, challenge yourself.
Yeah, and if you want something more on the apologetic side, I'll just throw this plug in there, because earlier we talked about Mormons and progressive Christians and Bible study and all those topics in the first half of that episode. If you want something a little more apologetic, there's people like Sean McDowell on YouTube, and there's several good people that do those kind of discussions.
Right.
Sean's the one that's coming to mind because I watch him all the time. He's one of my favorites.
I really enjoy William Lane Craig.
He's good too.
He's got some really good stuff. I
Yeah.
think he's open-minded to a lot of things.
Yeah.
Even Hugh Ross. Hugh Ross is more on the scientific side, like space and NASA and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, he's very smart and very into all that stuff. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Josh Swamidass
Oh.
is somebody that we heard on Heiser's podcast that he kind of leans into that evolutionary stuff, which is interesting.
That was very interesting.
That was what really sold me, like his story and his testimony of God using all that stuff and those topics to kind of influence him. And
well, what we can do
cool.
is we'll post on Instagram some of these things.
Some of these
for
people,
to see.
that you can follow and learn.
Make sure y'all follow us at behindthecurtainpc.
Yep.
If you have questions or something you want to talk about after listening to this, you can email us behindthecurtainpc@gmail.com. We're working on a Discord and a blog also.
There is a Discord. There's a blog published. We haven't added a whole lot of stuff to it yet, but
look for those resources coming soon, and all this stuff that we'll talk about. We'll post some of these resources we're talking about on there, so they're easy for y'all to find. If y'all say, "Man, they said something ridiculous on that episode," well, we'll show you where we got it.
Yeah.
But yeah. So we hope to hear from you guys. Hope you enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to listen. If you are listening, you would have to hear this to be listening. So share it with your friends and family.
Yeah.
We want this thing to blow up, man. We want it to go crazy.
All right, guys. Well, we'll finish Genesis 3 next week. Hope y'all tune in for that.
Maybe.
You never know, man.
All right.
We'll be in Revelation and still be going back to Genesis. So
Yep. Amen.
I mean, you have to.
Hallelujah.
All right. Bye, guys.
Later.